Okay, so today we are moving on to talk about float times and the critical path. Now, this is really, when we talk about the critical path, this is basically everything we've been building up to in this particular topic. But before we get to that, let's quickly talk about float times. So the float time, as I've got here, is the amount of time a task in a project network can be delayed without causing a delay to the subsequent tasks. So you may remember from an example that we did before, we had some gaps, some time in between the earliest start time and the latest start time. If we want to actually calculate this float time, we can just take the latest start time, so the latest time we can possibly start the task, minus the earliest start time. The float time is just the time in between these two things that we identify on our network diagram. And I'm going to refer to an example we did in the previous video too. Now, the critical path is the sequence of critical activities. Now, what I mean by critical activities is those that cannot be delayed without affecting the overall completion time of the project. So you may remember, if we look down to here, this is the example we ended off in the last video. Now, if you remember these starting points, let me just draw your attention to these. So A, B, C, and D. Do you remember we said that with activity A, the earliest start time was 0 and the latest start time was also 0. So we said that there's quite a bit of urgency to do this task first. We have to basically start it immediately, right? With B, C, and D, we have a little bit of time, right? With B, we could start B as late as 14 hours after completion, right? So here, our float time for activity B, let's do this in a totally different color. Our float time is 14 minus 0. So this means that if we think of this as hours, we have 14 hours to do this task. A good way to think about this is when you have to do something but it's not urgent, you kind of like float around a little bit. You don't have to get started straight away. That's what we mean by the float time here. With activity C, for example, the earliest start time is 0. We can start it right at the start, but we have up to 19 hours to complete this actual task, okay? So the time we can kind of float around and not do anything is going to be the latest start time, 19, minus 0, which will give us 19 hours. And the same thing goes for this guy here. 10 minus 0 gives you 10 hours. Now we can go along this entire network diagram and figure out the different float times. Figure out how long we have to do the particular activity. Let's consider this one on the bottom right. Its float time, the earliest start time after the beginning of the project that we can begin this task is at 11 hours, and the latest we can start it is 21 hours after. So we can find the float time always by taking our latest start time minusing the earliest start time. This guy will give us 10 hours here. So this is how we can work through the float times, this first section of what we're talking about in the video. Now, the second part is a little bit trickier to kind of conceptualize. The critical path, okay? So you may remember as I was going through in the previous video, I talked about some of these ones, right? Where the latest start time is exactly the same as the earliest start time, which means it's an urgent activity. We have to kind of do it straight away so that our project doesn't get delayed. Basically means that when the predecessors come, and according to everything else on our network diagram, we need to basically start this straight away. This is the same with A over here. And we figured out these values by forward and backward scanning through our network diagram. Now, you'll notice that the float time for all of these, if I do the latest start time minus the earliest start time, I'm going to get 0 for each of these. Now, these ones here, these vertices which contain these float times of 0, I've highlighted this last one as well, are going to make up our critical path. So we need to do all of these tasks really on time. Otherwise, it'll delay the entire project. So if I go through here, to find the critical path, I just need to highlight all of the edges that go through these vertices which have a float time of 0. So if I look at something like this, we can start at the finish. So I need to go from here to here. I need to go there. I need to go there. And then back to here. So if I want to say my critical path, so the order of the activities, which are basically the most important, this is what the entire project rests on, these critical activities that have to be started as soon as we get to them, basically. The critical path of this network diagram is going to be activity A to activity E to activity H to activity J. This is going to be the path we need to take. This is the critical path. So any delay in either of these activities will cause a delay in the entire project, right? If we take another path down, say we go down to say we go down to D, for example, it's not a critical path, right? Because once we get done with activity D, we have another 10 hours before we need to complete the next activity. The critical path means there's no float time. We have to do the tasks as soon as we finish them. We have to do the next subsequent task. Now, if we look at an example here, we are going to bring together basically everything that we've been doing in the last few videos. So first of all, we're going to draw a network diagram for this. We're going to calculate the earliest start time and the latest start time for each activity. That's what we did in the previous video. We'll find the float time for each. We're going to write down the critical path and what we call the minimum time required to complete the project. Now we can find the minimum time by just considering the very last vertex at the finish. So this guy over here at the finish. For this particular network diagram, the minimum time required to complete the project is 35 minutes. Okay, so let's get to it. Now we have all of these vertices here. We want to draw up a network diagram. So for activity, well, we have the start vertex here. And from here, everything is going to go. Now, we have activity A, and we have activity B. Now, a small note on these ones. Now, A was 6 from memory, B is 9. Now, when our vertices start and end at, when our activities start and end at the same vertex, whether start at the same vertex and end at the same vertex, we need to include a dummy activity. Now, I'm just going to draw this one over here. Now, it can just look something like this. It's just a dummy activity so that we can kind of get straight lines in our network diagram. So I won't get into it too much here, but basically it means that we can draw this kind of like this. We have B, and we have a dummy activity that leads us back here. But let's just go with the original picture we drew. And we've got to just note that there is going to be a dummy activity here. It's basically a rule with network diagrams. Anytime they start at the same vertex, two tasks start at the same, end at the same, we need to include a dummy activity. Now from here, we have that A and B are the immediate predecessor to C. So let me draw C over here. Now C has a time of 8, and D also, which has a time of 7. Okay, now let me draw my vertices in a different color, here and here. And it's saying that E has an immediate predecessor of D. So that's going to join back up over here. E has a time of 10. And we continue after we've done E. The reason it links back up to this vertex after C is that activity F has immediate predecessors C and E. So E has to meet back up with C before we can start with activity F, which is 12. And we get to our finish, which is over here. Okay, so we are just drawing in our network diagram. Let me center this a little bit so it looks a bit nicer. And then we will move on to our next section. So this is part A. This is our network diagram. Now what we're going to do now, we're going to do our forward and backward scanning in order to determine the earliest start time and the latest start time for each of these activities. So what we're going to do, I'm going to start at, let's do this in red. I start at vertex A. Remember these ones that are our first activities with our with no immediate predecessors. We write them here. Now they both start at 0. We've spoken about that before at length. Now when we get to activity C, the earliest we can start activity C is after 9, this is in days from memory. Yep, our time of completion is days. We have to go with the larger value here. Remember, we spoke about this before. We are limited by this step here. Sure, we can get A done in 6 hours, but since A and B are both immediate predecessors to C, we have to wait until the longer task is done. This is as early as we can possibly start. So for this one, we're going to have 9. This is at C. Now, since C and D are at the same vertex, I'll kind of explicitly label both here. Both have an earliest start time of 9. And then we are going to continue along. So I need to consider, I go to my next vertex, which is here. But once again, I need to think I'm limited by the activities that take longer. So I have to consider this path over here, because I can't start activity F until D and E are done, and they take longer, right? They take a total of 17 days to complete, right? So when I get to this vertex over here, I'm going to add 17 to 9, which gives me 26, and then I'm going to finish after 12 hours, which means that 12 days. So that means 38 days are over here. So this is just a recap of what we were doing last video. Now, when we backward scan, remember at our finish, we write the same number, and then we have to basically go backwards. Now, we are going to go to here. So, oh, I just realized I've forgotten one. This vertex down here. I have 7. This is the vertex before starting activity E, so I have to consider the 7 days here. I'm going to get 16. And now I want to backward scan. So this is going to be 26 also, because we're just following that path backwards. If I go down to activity E, I minus 10 from that. That gives me 16 also. And when I go back to here, my activity D, I'm subtracting 7 from 16, so that gets me to here. And scanning backwards along here, I'm subtracting 8 from 26. So that's going to give me 18. And going back, I have 2 ways that I can go back. One is along B. That's 9 hours. So down here, I'm just going to put 0, because 9 minus 9 gives me 0. And if I go along this one, 9 minus 6 gets me to 3. So I've calculated the earliest start times and the latest start times for each of these. Now, if a question asks you this in an exam, you can always just write these boxes above and forward and backward scan your way through. Now, part C, the third part of this, is we want to find the float times. Okay, so we're basically just going to go through bit by bit and calculate what these float times are. So the float time for A, we'll do it in alphabetical order. I have to do the latest start time minus the earliest start time. So 3 minus 0 gives me 3 days. I won't write down all the subtractions because It's really kind of just basic arithmetic. We can go through. So B, 0 minus 0 gives us 0 days. So we should already be thinking at this point, what's our kind of critical one here? For C, I have 18 minus 9, which gives me 9 days. Part D, 9 minus 9 gives me 0 days. Part E, I have 16 minus 16, gives me 0 days. So I have a float time of 0. And finally for F, 26 minus 26 gives me 0 days also. So the only ones that have an actual float time associated is activity C and activity A. With these two, I can kind of float around for a little bit. It's not super urgent that I start them straight away. Now remember as well here, the dummy activity that I've included here, which when we start the next part, which is our critical path, this doesn't get included, okay? Because it's just an imaginary task. Now for the next section, I will be finding the critical path. So the path that, this means the activities that I have to do in order for our project to not be delayed. Remember, the activities that I need to do, which won't delay our project, are the ones with a float time here, for this particular example, of 0, right? We have to do these as quickly as we possibly can. Now, when we look at our network diagram, we can basically just start from the end and just trace along the edges where we see these earlier start time and later start time being the same. So I start here, I go down to there, I go down to here, I go to here, and I go over to here. Okay, so I have to basically go in this order because these are the critical activities. These are the ones, if you look, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same, and that's the same float time. We cannot afford to start these late. If we start these late, it will delay our entire project. So it is critical that we get these particular ones done. These are our critical activities that have to get done immediately so that our project isn't delayed. That's what we mean when we look at the critical path. Now, because we don't include the dummy activity, I'm going to just write the critical path. So we start B, D, then E, then activity F. So my critical path is going to be B to D to E, then to F. And finally, we want to find the minimum time required to complete this project. So we are going to look at my finish vertex. Why is this? Oops. Sorry guys, having some technical difficulties. But our minimum time required is the very end, which is 38 minutes. So over here, I'm going to write minimum time equals, 38 days. Now remember, the time that they give you will always be specified in the question or in the estimated completion time if they give you one of these activity charts. But this is how we can just revise drawing up our network diagram, finding the earliest and latest start times, which is revision from last video. And once we do this, we calculate the float time for each activity by minusing the earliest start time from the latest start time. That's what we've done here. We find the critical path by just linking these tasks that we cannot delay. So these have a float time of 0. So it's critical that we get these done on time. And then we just look at the very last box that we draw at the finish point of the project, and that will give us the minimum time to complete this project. This brings us to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.